Swan.
Yeah. Hey. Cool. So, yeah, Windows event logs seem kind of boring. Anybody in here collecting them and monitoring them currently? Okay. About how many event logs are you monitoring? 7? Okay. Well, so far we've come across about 2,000 unique fields and basically 1,000 plus unique event IDs. So why would you want to collect Windows event logs? So it's going to allow you to detect things like sneaky backdoors. We've wrote event tracing for WMI, persistence, process creation, ransomware, anti-forensics, PowerShell logging, any escalation, and then things like hash cracking for Kerberos. And the possibilities are endless. So the cost is free. It's simple to implement through group policy. What we started this talk, or we started collecting Windows event logs. Basically, what do you do if you don't have an IDS and everybody has legitimate credentials, right? And yes, APT does leave Windows event logs almost all the time, and there's no approval necessary. It's built into Windows. So for those that are in environments where an approved product list is harder than applying for a home loan, this is something you'll want to do. And this is not a Sysmon talk. It's not a Sysmon replacement. If you can deploy Sysmon, do it. Sysmon is great for, initial compromise, but once an actor starts moving laterally and living off the land, this is where you're going to want to supplement Sysmon with Windows event logs. And don't let vendors tell you that you can't catch APT for free. So the most important prereq to having Windows event logs is you need to basically become friends with your system admins, help desk, HR, because they're going to be the ones who push all the policies, the first line of defense, right? They'll help you swiftly deconflict activity. They'll help you respond and eliminate threats. You need to understand like the AD environment too, because certain GPOs, you're only going to want to push to certain devices. HR is good for like deconflicting unknown account creation. Also, getting access to your company's help desk ticketing system has been huge for us. 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody installing a random service related to troubleshooting a hard drive, you're able to quickly deconflict that versus spending 48 hours on incident response. With HR, this one is also good. Is it normal for an accountant to run .NET libraries? Probably not. Hope not. Developers, yes, they're going to run a lot of .NET libraries, but you'll be able to figure that out. So you go to your system admins. Unfortunately, in security, to get anything done, you usually have to go through someone else. So you go to your system admins, and they're going to ask, what's in it for me? So Windows event IDs basically limitless to help the other IT departments, whether it's lockouts for help desk, host baseline auditing, people deleting shares, user keeps turning off the computer, probably, they're probably having issues, you want to give them a call. Computer's going to die, basically, it's throwing errors. If they're like, well, what about the resources this is going to take up on my network? You can limit the CPU and even the events per second that are sent, and then, again, come up with some of your own ideas. So this is basically how Windows Event Forwarding works. You have a WinRM on the host that forward to a WEF server. The WEF server doesn't even actually have to be a Windows server. It can even be a Windows computer, and one Windows computer, a Windows server, can handle 10,000 plus computers. Once you get up into like 50, 60, 70,000, you might want to run 2 or more. And then all the events are forwarded to one location. Then we use NXLog or WinBeats to forward those over to Elasticsearch. We chose Elasticsearch because it's free, dynamically creates a field. We're dealing with like 2,000 fields where, ArcSight, you have to jam all the specific fields into what they give you, like a list of like 200. So it took me like 2 days just to jam PowerShell logs into ArcSight because they only have a parser for security logs, and they don't even grab all the fields. So again, the whole thing being free, we decided to use Elasticsearch. Just a quick disclaimer, everybody's environment's different. Test this and just keep testing it and filter and repeat, until you can't anymore. And we'll have Adam come up.
Yeah. So we have the ability to monitor about 5 different environments. And that gives us a pretty good mix of what you might see on your network. So one of the best networks we pull from is mostly developers. And developers are always doing unique and interesting things like running sysinternals tools, stuff that most networks, people aren't really doing that often legitimately. But developers, they find all sorts of workaround and tricks that always cause anomalies and stuff to look into. And then, like Nate said, we have one environment that is everyone, it's segregated from the internet. Everyone has legitimate credentials, so that one's pretty good to look for stuff. And then the third, the one that we get the most fun out of anyways, is probably the Cuckoo Malware Lab, and we get a little bit more detail with that. So when you start collecting Windows events, a big thing with, if you're like into SIM architecture and all this, how many events per second? Well, if you're familiar with the DISA-STIG, it's really similar to probably what a lot of people have their GPO's audits set to anyways, but with that, you get about 1.5 to 3 events per host per second. So just an idea of scale. However, there's some caveats there. If you start enabling things like PowerShell or object access, which literally logs every time a file is accessed, a registry key, a handle, it's ridiculous. So you can blow up your logs. You can go from like 1 to 3 events per second to 10,000 events per second. I enabled everything on my personal box, and in 2 days I had 200 gigs of Windows event logs. So you definitely do not want to do that. You're going to end up like the little meme in the corner there, covered in logs with no way out. And again, here's just some more information. If you don't have this enabled already, the biggest player is security log, followed closely by PowerShell. PowerShell, the reason it has so many is every time a module is loaded or anytime like a pipe is created, people love using pipes in PowerShells. That's all logged in a separate log. So Sysmon is the next. We do use Sysmon, but we don't really get into too much of Sysmon in this talk. So for the Cuckoo Malware Lab, basically the reason we created this was we just weren't really seeing all that much malware on the networks we were monitoring. So we decided, hey, let's increase the noise. Let's have some fun. So what we did was wrote a script, scrapes some popular repositories online that are for free, and it submits it into Cuckoo. If you're not familiar with Cuckoo, it's just a sandbox that's open source, very powerful for the most part. And then within the agent there, we have Windows event forwarding. So it's pretty good. What we do is when we see an interesting event, we have the submission ID for Cuckoo tagged in there. So it's just like one click and you can start looking at that malware sample if it's interesting. And if you're interested in how to kind of get that set up, you can always reach out to us. But that all goes into ELK, and then from there, we just start doing queries and looking for new and interesting events. ELK is very powerful, elastic. The Kibana interface, if you're familiar with it at all, you hit that tag button, and you can whitelist or do the query very quickly. So, sort of an idea of Windows logs is passive, right? So a lot of analysts are used to this alerting framework where you're basically like, I only want to see stuff that is known malicious. Well, with Windows event logs, and especially like PowerShell and stuff, there's just so many bypasses that you can do alerting on some things like C script, W script, these sorts of process creation and stuff. But it's almost better to just have a tool like Elastic that allows you to do aggregations, right? So last 30 days, what are all the processes that were created? Let me look at the least frequency process creations. Let me look at the least frequency user accounts, things like this. So some of the queries that I run regularly are like, what are all the commands that my domain admins ran, right? Or what are all the net commands? Because people get in your network, they start doing enumeration, they run a lot of net, DS query, these sorts of things. So you don't just find the signs of infection, but you look for the signs of people doing enumeration and things like this. You can't really alert on a lot of that. Another thing that we didn't really think we would see when we first started, but is with the command line details on process creation, which is event 4688, you can get the command line details. So anytime someone opens up like a notepad document through Explorer, then that notepad document is recorded, right? So we started seeing on some of our networks where we had sysadmins and stuff with their plain text creds and a notepad document on their desktop, right? It was like one of the first easy ones we had when we started getting logs was everyone on our network is an idiot and is storing their keys to the kingdom in a notepad document.
On a shared desktop.
Yeah. So once you start doing these aggregations and stuff, the big point is you quickly kind of understand what the baseline is. You start seeing the users that oh, Tori, what is he doing again? Running these crazy commands like, we'll just ignore Tori for the most part. Stuff like this. So again, another thing that when we kind of have given this ability to other people is they're used to this alerting sort of train of thought, right? So they go, oh, Adam told me that if I see C-script that it's 100% malicious and we need to shut down the world right now. Well, when you're first getting into this, you don't really want to do that. If you have Windows event logs, you can already do like not the full forensics process, obviously, but you can do like the 15% of that exists in Windows logs. You can pull all the logs for that host for the past 10, 15 days, all the logs for that user even for the past 15 days and say like, okay, what else is this person doing? And from there you can kind of get a better idea of, okay, is this a thing or not? And decide on what your next steps will be. So while your memory acquisition is going down and you decide to pull data from that host, you can just take advantage of that time, go through and look at all the events that have happened as well. So yeah, logs can be fragile though, right? We're talking about Windows. The adversary is on the Windows box. If they have system, they can do all sorts of fancy things. I think the NSA wrote some tools. They were able to remove specific events as they occurred. With WEF, if you have event forwarding, that shouldn't really be an issue because by the time the event happens, it has already been shipped off to your centralized logging, right? But yeah, so there's a million different ways that the logs can break. There's a couple different ways that WEF can break. One of the more interesting ones is if Windows can't log an event, like disk space issues or things like that, it logs an event anyway. So it logs event 521. It's like, okay, if you couldn't log an event, why were you able to log this 521 events? Makes me think, huh? So if you have any sort of experience with Windows logs and in an environment that the logging is configured correctly, you've seen this before, but this is like one of the super easy, simple ones that you can get right out of the box with Windows log. So VSS admin, that was recently used by the WannaCrypt ransomware. Those headline news. They use VSS admin to delete the shadow copies. Shadow copies are just backups of all your files. So a lot of ransomware, the first thing they'll do is delete those shadow copies if they have admin, and then to start encrypting your files. yeah, if you're not familiar with any of these and you've seen them maybe on your network, you're in trouble, most likely. So another thing that we watch a lot pretty closely is like all MSHT, WScript, or CScript events. There's a few others too that can run scripts dynamically, but these are the big boys. Yeah, if you talk about like app locker bypasses, they're always using these scripting languages to bypass app locker. So these are just some samples out of the lab. A lot of them are ransomware. Here it is a little blown up, in case you couldn't see it. So back a few years ago, the company Nate and I work for got hit by Deep Panda. And this is just an example of, okay, APT groups, they're smart, they have all the resources in the world, but they're leaving events behind, right? So this is their dropper. What it was they spoofed our VPN page, right? So the users would get an email, hey, log in via VPN, and then when they went there, it would say, you need to update your VPN client. And then from there, they would be owned, right? Well, when they executed that VPN client, or luckily in this case, we were spared. None of our users fell for it before it was cleaned up. But anyways, all these are examples of just the 4688 events that were created, right? So there's some things in here that would stick out like a sore thumb to an analyst. One being the ActiveX one there. It's an executable process that ends in .bin. On Windows box, that's not really a thing. There's MSI exe, right? .bin, not really a executable file format that's created. So they also used another command to do their persistence by creating a registry key in the runs. So it's a regadd there. Anyways, so all this is stuff that you can look for, right? Look for past 30 days. Where are all the reg commands that included current version run, right? You get a good idea of some of the stuff you can look for. So there are anti-forensics where, the event log service can be shut down, anti-forensics techniques, right? So this is just one of them, event ID 1100. From the lab, we get a lot of malware that likes to add local admins, so that's one of the things that we look for. On your networks, if you're still using local admin accounts, time to move into the 21st century. Disable those if you can. Task scheduling, so 4698, you have to enable it in the GPO, but once you do, it's very, very powerful. So in this event, it actually gives you a XML breakdown of everything that was created for the task, right? So if you actually go in and create a task through like the GUI, this is the XML that is created on the host. So you can see everything that task is going to do. So this one stuck out from the lab, and it's a command where it's a task where they're executing system settings 43 there. So 9 out of 10 of the aggregations we do and the searches we do is all just data tables within Kibana. If you're familiar with that, or not, doesn't really matter. But just to show, like, you can kind of get involved with the other sorts of visualizations. This one's a line chart. So I just did like a quick brute force sort of scan on our network, and it sticks out like a sore thumb, right? If you do like bad logins. The other ones down here, those are just most likely bad configurations. One of the things that you see a lot if you start looking at bad logins is people who have like a mapped share or something and then change their password, but don't change it when they map the share, where they map the share, so it'll continue to log in, try to over and over again. It creates a ridiculous amount of noise. and wish they would fix that. So another useful channel that you can pull from is WMI Activity Operational. WMI, Matt Graber has done a lot of work here from, I think he works for FireEye now. He has some pretty powerful tools. He says that Windows doesn't log anything, but it does. It logs errors by default, and then you can get even fancier using event tracing for Windows. So this kind of has gotten more visibility recently. Matt Swan has a very good talk. His guys from Office 365 and Cyberpoint, they took it from more of a red team perspective. So if you're on red team and you're in this talk, not just to learn like what are the defenders looking for in Windows event logs, you can get some use out of this because Windows has a built-in keylogger using event tracing, and it's a right-click in Event Viewer, and it's enabled if you have admin, and then you can just start logging keystrokes. But what we like to use it for is WMI. So once you enable it, it logs to an event tracing file, and you need to do some sauce to convert it to a format that WEF will subscribe to. The script I use, it's probably not good for scale, but I do have it on GitHub. It's just under my username, which will be included in the slides and stuff. But so the big thing that we see a lot in the lab, because we see a lot of malware droppers in the lab, is WMI for anti-analysis, right? So it's a big thing. Malware authors don't want their malware running on FireEye's, sandbox or Cuckoo sandbox. They want it to be running on regular users' computers. So some of the tricks that they do is look for VMware or VirtualBox in the BIOS. That's what the first three there are. Or they'll look at the video card. That's what the second one is. And the third one, I've never seen this implemented in anything else besides WMI, but actually that one's just the motherboard. But there's actually a fourth one here recently that I saw where they queried the chassis information. So the chassis could include your laptop case or the case that you bought off a Newegg for 27 cents on sale, right? If it has information in there about normally a user box, a regular computer, it'll say like, oh, this is a Dell, this is a cooler box or something like this. But in a VM, it'll be empty. So if they see empty chassis information, then they know that they might be in a sandbox. You can also, with WMI, do process creation. A lot of red team groups have been using this. When we see red team droppers being put into our lab, they like to use WMI for process creation. I think that there must be like a module or something that someone wrote for Empire to embed it into an Office document. Haven't been able to find it yet, but every time Empire is in an Office document, they use this WMI to start Empire. So all you have to do is event ID 11, and it's Win32 process create, and it's logged. And then the last one there is event consumer persistence. So PowerSploit, it's WMI persistence, calls it the most advanced. It's like, this is the advanced persistence, right? So I hope all the red teams use it because we can see you without any sort of extra agent. What it is in WMI, you can create event consumers. An event consumer event is different from a Windows event, right? So think of an event like an event-driven programming or something like this. That's the kind of event that we're talking about here. But it'll say, hey, wait for this event to occur on the computer if it's like startup or something like this. And then if you see that, here's the executable that is responsible for handling that event. So, but it's logged, and anytime you create a command line event consumer, via event tracing for Windows, you'll see it. So in this example, PowerSploit, which is again a post-exploitation framework for Microsoft, their default name is Updater. So if you enable this, look for command line and event consumers for updaters, and there you found red team using PowerSploit. Yeah, so the other thing you can do is remote WMI. It's like you can get on other people's computers, lateral movement sort of activity. And in this case, the attacker box, the attacker user is going to be different from the attacker host name is going to be different from the host name of the box that it's running on. And that's how you catch remote WMI. I haven't seen remote WMI being used legitimately. And then the other the kind of final idea is, take advantage of Windows logs and Windows event forwarding. You can write your own agent. You can write a quick PowerShell script to get the telemetry from the hosts that you want. If Microsoft doesn't have it in there, it isn't too difficult to write a quick PowerShell script or something like this to get that data that you want. So here's just some very simple ideas, like running netstat every 30 seconds or something like this. If a user if that's the first thing you're doing on a box when you get your hands on a keyboard and want to check it, then why not just have it run automatically for you, and then you don't have to put hands on the keyboard. You can just have it there in the history.
So PowerShell. So you deploy version 5, allows you basically to monitor like script block logging. So all the language that's ran. And so a really powerful thing is Microsoft basically has a built-in like queries or keywords that they look for that they monitor or they log suspicious PowerShell as a severity warning. So if it's not considered suspicious by PowerShell, it's just monitored as a severity info. You still get it, but I tell people as a minimum to look for event ID 4104 and severity warning, right? Like you like running PowerSploit and other Empire or whatever frameworks that all these really smart guys have written usually have some sort of EID 4104 and severity warning if the volume is too great for just regular info logs. You can also, with Elasticsearch, write a custom analyzer to have a character filter to exclude things like plus or carets, which is basically a bypass. So, again, people are trying to look for a suspicious PowerShell via these like byte transfer or other net download. But ironically, with PowerShell, you can just write like, bypass with in between each letter a caret, and you go to run your query, you're not going to find it. So we've written a custom Elasticsearch analyzer to skip those character filters. Just to, it's not the greatest, but it helps, and takes an hour or something to write or less. This is the actual event text blown up. It's probably the Kofta malware. It's basically loading exe into memory. So 80 backdoors. This one's interesting. Harmjoy and Sub-T and Sean Metcalf, really smart folks, have started talking about ways to persist in Active Directory beyond executables, beyond PEs, right? There's no AV that's going to detect it. Most people probably aren't even monitoring these events. And this event, there's a GPO by default in sysvol. It's the same GUID in any Active Directory environment. Whether through the command line or through just editing the file, you can enable a privilege that you add the user to this privilege, this SE-enabled delegation privilege, and it will give you control over all users in the domain. So, let's say they know I'm using some random domain admin account. They kill that account, but before they killed my account, I created some other random user, or I still have somebody else's password, and I added that user to this privilege. You kill my DA account, I can get right back in, no problem. This one, curb roast, again, Harm, Joy, and Metcalf. There's, at the end of the slide, I'll include all the people to stay up to date with, but this one is any event IDs that are going to allow you to do curb roast attacks, which is basically like downgrading, curb roast, authentication, which I think the beginning uses a timestamp in the machine name, and basically you can say to not use that, and so you're just getting the hash again, and then you can do hash cracking. I've shown here that without this filter up at the top, primary group ID 513 excluding that, you're going to get hundreds of thousands of events. People are like, oh, event overload. It literally takes 1 second to exclude that. Microsoft recommends it. I'm now left with 448 events, and it's simple to see. The query I ran didn't even include the pre-auth or encrypted or DES actual hash cracking. So if I did that, I'd get an exact match. This is just to show that the difference between alerting and exploring, and if you have the right SIM, you can't have too many events. Like it's more than simple to exclude hundreds of thousands and millions of events in 5 minutes, 10 seconds, right? So this again, this one's a little bit difficult to explain, but so event ID 4648, somebody using like run as or somebody else's credentials, like this is I think a 30-day query, and just in about a couple minutes, I was able to narrow down to like 5,000 events from about 1 million. But then, if I really wanted to do something exact, I can narrow it down to 28 events by looking for a target host, local host. So basically elevating to something on that local host. But this event log has been pretty cool because I'll actually see people logging into like their virtual machines. I've caught like domain admins, troubleshooting file share. What do they do? I've done it before I knew how serious of an issue it was being help desk in those things, 7 or 8 years ago. But they store the DA credentials so that person can access the file share. Like there's probably one host on your environment that has this, and that host gets compromised, the credentials are stored, and it's game over. So here's another AD backdoor. This one isn't all users. It's just basically giving you privilege to any other user account. And again, if I ran the query at the top, I'd get the exact match. Again, I'm showing you just how easy it is to query and find this. So in the bottom left, under object class, you're looking for a user, and then you're looking for a display name, so a service principal name, and then you'll have like 188 events that you just have to scroll down for. These are on the left. These are basically data tables, and it ranks everything as one. Like I said, an analyst knows what they're looking for, is going to find this in just a few seconds. This is yet again another backdoor. This is not the whole AD. It's just for another user. This I ran the exact query just the one time, right? So the limitless possibilities of Windows logs. This one is just more, it looks cool, but actually you can detect like evil twin AP attacks or other wireless attacks, like bypasses, some of like rubber ducky attacks, but they use WLAN instead of just like a local network. So on the right, all these letters. This is Elasticsearch like cloud tag, but it just shows you, the larger the SSID Wi-Fi name, the more times that's authenticated to. But then over on the left, you have the encryption type. And the purple one, like the dark purple one, is like no encryption. So you could basically, you got a CEO or something that leaves the network, they come back and you're like, hey, I might want to train him to not connect to an unencrypted Wi-Fi. There's still people running web at home. This one's really interesting for devices that leave the network and come back. I mean, the Wi-Fi even logs like if it's FIPS enabled, WPA2 enterprise, the adapter name, the peer SSID, the local MAC address, the peer MAC address. This one is pretty cool to show people just the power of Windows event logs. So a few more hunting possibilities. Don't have slides for these, so download via signed PE, bitsadmin.exe/transfer. It's built in, executable, that's signed. Going to bypass app locker and those other things. So you got PowerShell 5 enabled. There's bypasses for everything, but you can look for, engine version 2 star, right? If you have everybody upgraded to 5. Nobody should be running version 2. Creating backup images, potential data exfil or some sort, can be easily detected with a event ID and application. Services installed, this is, persistence. APT28 had one recently where they installed it as Google something. That was an easy win. Scheduled tasks, Adam talked about, but Shamoon APT had a wiper basically for some oil companies in the Middle East. That's a super easy win. So you're looking for Kerberos and other hash cracking. So if it's already enabled, then what do? Well, you can monitor these for the different weak encryption types like MD5 and RC4, HMAC, etc. We've thought of some other backdoors. Use a script path, add a script to the sysvol, and then just add it to any random user every time they log in. That script's going to be ran, but you can catch that. Just there's like hundreds of properties that you can edit in an AD's user account. People have 802.1x. This one's good. Why was a new certificate issued? Changing local time for evasion. So Adam had it in his slide, but if you're collecting the Windows event IDs and you base it on when it logged the event ID, actually Shamoon up there and some others do this. They'll change the time to 7 years ago or 24 hours ago or 2 weeks ago. Most everyone's queries in their SIM are time based. So if you change this, if you change the time and you're going based on the log time, you're going to miss this. But it's easy to catch, filter out virtualization stuff, and it's no problem. Editing boot values. This is again WannaCrypt recently started doing this. It's another easy victory. And compliance, clearing firewall policies, those sort of things. Standard malware does it, and also you want to know, if you have auditing, like Windows logs can help with a lot of auditing, and in compliance environments, that's a big deal. HIPAA and those sort of things in the DoD. Rather than waiting like 60 days for the compliance officer to come back down and scan, you should know right away. So we will actually assist with implementations, or any questions you guys have, ask. The more environments that we can share information and queries with, the better we can refine these searches. So just maybe buy us a beverage or some food or something. Don't be afraid to take us up on this. So you got all the monitoring. That's great. What if somebody disables it? Deletes the GPOs, you need to alert on those sort of things. We also create like a PowerShell script to know how many computers have logged in the last 40 or 24 hours, and then compare that to the unique host names, because there's a lot of times that devices might not be checking in. We also actually monitor the event log for Windows Event Forwarding plugin. So anytime there's an error subscribing to a channel, you would think that you're not going to be able to subscribe to it anyways, but we've had pretty good success monitoring those channels for errors. Sometimes, like if you subscribe to too many channels in one subscription and the one errors out, it might basically kill all the other ones. Again, this is the next one in 4719, somebody disabling auditing, and then on the web servers themselves, log the event collector logs. I'm not going to go over every single one of these, but just some recommendations. Don't run your SIM on the same infrastructure that you're monitoring, right? So if you're running your SIM in a VMware environment and somebody just has regular system rights to that VMware environment, they can delete all of your stuff. If you're using AD authentication to that SIM for VMware and those sort of things, like again, they only have to compromise one account. This stuff is big recently with attacking, as defense has gotten better, attacking defensive infrastructure has become pretty trivial. A lot of these things aren't really secured. When people built antivirus products and SIMs, they never really took into consideration that somebody would be attacking those things. So I've seen people attack the infrastructure for the logging before they even did anything else. Because if you're able to disable that, you can do whatever you want. Use it to help with your network inventory, increase the log sizes. You can even encrypt the logs with PGP if you're super paranoid, or, you're logging command line and there's some passwords in there or something. And, machine learning is great. You can use it for some things, but if you're running machine learning on an environment that's already compromised, you literally might be, baselining the malware. So that's just something to consider, and especially in management-only networks where everything is an anomaly. People having to work at 2 or 3 in the morning, getting a call from, some colonel or C-level or, whatever environment you work in where, it doesn't matter. The person needs something done now. And then jump boxes. This is something that really frustrates me and Adam. You're able to get system on a jump box, and everybody's using a password manager. You can read that stuff from memory. People are using secure CRT and PuTTY. You're going to start getting network device credentials again by reading memory. They're storing passwords in just secure CRT profiles that aren't encrypted. Please don't use a jump box unless it's for like 2 hops away or something. This is you're going to compromise 20 user accounts by accessing one box. And again, we haven't even scratched the surface. Like I said, we have thousands of fields and thousands of event logs to collect. Don't be afraid to come up and ask us a question. The more I learn, the more I realize I have no idea what I'm doing. This is actually a picture of my son driving thinking he's driving a garden hose turner. So that's how I feel sometimes. These are going to be in the slides. Not going to go over them, but just the one thing I will recommend is to enable the GPO to apply even if the GPO hasn't changed. So basically, Windows has some value that it monitors if the GPO has changed. So even if the GPO hasn't changed, but those settings have changed on the host, it won't reapply those settings. So that's a big misnomer or something that people miss. That's a big deal. Then there's some resources to set this up to help you guys, get on the ground running with WEF and PowerShell logging and process monitoring. These are all folks that you want to follow. I think I'm up to following like 1,000 people on Twitter now, but I have push notifications for all these people. Just to name a few, like Caffeine, who is usually monitoring exploit kits and other like recent crimeware or malware. Usually specific to Windows environments. Florian Roth, he has a really good resource for SIM signatures called Sigma. It's on GitHub. I helped develop that with him and Capture and Thomas Psatsky and some other really smart folks that we have a Slack working group for. And then you have all the Microsoft folks, all the red teamers on here: SubT, Metcalf, Harmjoy. Relic works with Trusted Sec and all those other folks. 5? Yeah, okay. These are resources, and credits to the people whose blogs we've read. This is going to be on a slide. I know you can't read it. The more resources and credits to people, more resources and credits to people. So, thanks for coming to talk. Does anybody have any questions? I know probably drug you guys through the dirt and, probably about to fall asleep. Yes, sir. Right. So you basically could just increase the time frame. So instead of like a day, do a couple weeks and base it off that unique host. Like Elasticsearch has some pretty powerful aggregations where I could say bad login per host per timestamp, and even another few things. So we brute force is kind of one of those things like 4624 and other bad logins that have been around forever. We just kind of included that just as a little graph. It's really never that useful. Most people aren't doing a brute force in an environment anymore. So,
To give an idea of the scale, it was like the y-axis was like 20,000. So the brute force is pretty noisy in that instance, where it was trying like 1,000 attempts a minute, sort of really loud.
Yes, sir. So we're using like a Pro or Enterprise Windows 7 license, and then enabling GPOs on that host, and then basically just installing NXLog or WinBeats and consuming from the different channels. So we have like 20 different auditing things that we enable, and then we just subscribe to those channels. Does that make sense? Yep. Yeah, we do everything. We collect all application logs, all system, WMI tracing, all security, and then even the like Microsoft dash Windows, dash Internet Explorer or Microsoft Office, or we've seen some pretty cool stuff even with like kernel power errors, and we collect probably like 30 or 40 channels. Yeah. So what's that?
Yeah,
No.
it actually depends on it now. For the Cuckoo like web interface now depends on Elastic, but we don't send to the same instance of Cuckoo.
Yeah, so we're
just the logs.
We're just collecting Windows event logs from Cuckoo to our like main SIM and kind of throwing it in with like legitimate Windows event logs and like malicious Windows event logs. And then like Adam said, every Windows event log that comes from that host is tagged with the Cuckoo submission ID. We wrote like a little Python script or something to Yeah, I've been asked that question a few times. I've asked that myself. I feel like I'd be chasing a rabbit, but it's some parameters that Microsoft considers suspicious. It's pretty. Right. Yeah. No, it's you had to basically like read their blog and stuff. Yeah, that was a one-off, but it ended up being really cool to know that the warning level is considered suspicious. Right. And there's a few things legitimately that will log it, but for the most part, like you said, a lot of the invoke obfuscation and other post exploitation PowerShell tools will at least log one time. I know there's a bypass for everything, but yep. Anyone else? All right, cool. Thank you guys.